Welcome back to another episode of Ballroom Chat. I'm your host, Samantha, and today you might notice that things look a little bit different. This episode of the podcast was pre recorded, but don't fear, if you are watching this during its first hour of the premiere of this episode, I will be down in the chat answering any questions that I might be able to. If you have not already, please do hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that you get an alert every time that we post new content. My guest today is an accomplished dancer holding many first place titles in Lindy Hop. He is a competitor, instructor, and the founder of a nonprofit organization whose mission is to preserve and celebrate American swing era music through dance. Please help me welcome to the podcast, Anthony Chen. Well, thank you, Anthony, for agreeing to be a guest today. I am so excited to talk about Lindy Hop. So I like to start first and foremost by asking all of our guests, how did you get into the dance world? What brought you into the dance industry?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Samantha. So I had kind of a circuitous way of getting into the dance world. I started dancing when I was about 8, doing more traditional Chinese dances, like it was something that my mom really wanted me to do. And so I just did some of those performances for my elementary school. I don't know if that's really the thing that got me into dancing per se, that gave me the bug. But when I was in middle school in 8th grade, I started breakdancing, and I would say that's more of my gateway drug into dancing in general. And then when I guess 2 years later, um, from it's kind of a strange, maybe a little bit of a nerdy story, but when I was working at a laboratory, a lot of the other high school interns wanted to go check out this community center where they were doing East Coast swing and jitterbug, and we can go into that a little bit more. But I started doing that in about 10th grade, and then didn't really start doing Lindy Hop until college, um, when I think my girlfriend and I really wanted to learn more about that, and then I kind of made that transition into Lindy Hop, and then started getting more serious about that. So I guess I could say I started swing dancing in general in 2003. That's when I was in 10th grade. So you can do the math, and that's how old I am now.
Awesome, awesome. And at what point did it go from this is a fun kind of hobby that I have to, well, maybe I could potentially teach and become a professional dancer and become a international coach?
Yeah, I feel like it just kind of naturally transitioned to that. When I was in high school and going with my friends, I'd always want to bring my friends to go swing dancing with me, because it was just the most fun, most addictive thing that I've ever done. And so I'd always just be teaching friends, right? It's just a whole bunch of teenagers, really, if you can imagine, this huge wooden floor, 200 teenagers in one room, and then like some teenagers in the corner trying to like teach each other how to throw people around. Um, and then when I was in college, I still really liked teaching, and so I helped kind of keep we had a group called Jitterbugs Anonymous, and this is at the University of New Mexico, and but essentially a lot of people who were addicted to swing dancing. And I taught for our university club while I was there pretty much the whole time. I helped run it, helped kind of keep it going and pass it on to the rest of the crowd that were also really into swing dancing back then. And then around that time, I started traveling a little bit more nationally. So there's a lot of um, conventions. We call them Lindy Hop like exchanges, or workshops or events, and I'd start traveling to that to take classes, to compete. And then just at one of these events, I think the very first one where I started teaching nationally, someone just approached me after I had been dancing with them and asked if I wanted to do a workshop in Washington, in Spokane. Um, and then after that, I just started getting asked to do more and more workshops, and that's kind of how that snowball just started going. So it's just a lot of competitions throughout the states. Eventually, started teaching internationally. So it wasn't ever anything that I had as strived to do.
Mm.
Um, I hate to say that it fell in my lap. I know I have been working, like, I think a lot of it's just been from passion, trying to get better at it. A lot of it's just because I really enjoyed it. And I don't think I've ever really gone 2 weeks without dancing since 2003, except maybe now in this pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. That's so cool. And I think um I feel like when you're talking about, I was just passionate about it and I started getting all of these offers. I think that's something that happens in the art industry, the dance industry, the theater industry, the music industry that wouldn't happen anywhere else, I think, where it's just like, hey, this kid's like he really likes this Lindy swing. Maybe we should like have him do a lecture or something. And then the next group is like, hey, didn't he do a lecture for this other event? Maybe we should hire him too. And it snowballs out of
Yeah,
nowhere.
absolutely. I think it's a lot of word of mouth. Just people that maybe had taken a class where I taught one time, they decided that they wanted to bring me there. I think that's also the case, like what you're saying with many other instructors in this as well. I'm actually not quite sure. I think and this is where my ignorance is going to show with ballroom, the entire audience that's going to be listening here, that ballroom instructors tend to have a lot of credentials and have to have a lot of competition wins or that sort of thing in order to start teaching, to be a credentialed instructor. There isn't really anything like that. You just kind of have to show yourself and be heard of as a good dancer or a good instructor to be continually hired.
Yeah, the ballroom dance industry is a little bit weird. There are a couple of different paths that you can go. For me personally, I am not a nationally ranked anything.
Uh-huh.
My experience is all just teaching and coaching and getting instruction from other teachers and coaches. But yeah, I feel like with the social dances, and I use the broad term social dance, even though, like you said, there are competitions and there
Mhm.
are performances, and it's just as much a competitive sport as ballroom dance is. Um, but I feel like with those social avenues, it's much more like word of mouth, and then you see the same faces over and over again, and it's like, all right,
Right.
we'll follow you wherever you're going to go, which is
Yeah.
awesome.
I never really advertise myself, um, which I think is bad for business, but I also just kind of let it go wherever it goes in terms of my dancing career. I'm professional in the sense that I teach a lot of places, but I don't depend on it for my income, which is also nice in this particular crisis that we're in.
Yes, I'm sure that you have had a much less stressful couple of months than
Yeah.
other
And
instructors that are full time.
yeah,
Yeah.
I am so sorry.
We all get through it, and
Yeah.
we all learn and adapt. But I want to kind of circle back because I feel like we jumped over a huge portion of today, which is for the ballroom audience that is listening.
Yes.
We I will throw myself under the bus on this one. We tend to think of Lindy Hop as like this thing that we kind of do, but we mix it in with jive and we refer to it as Lindy Swing. And it's like
Mhm.
high kicks and throws over the back. And it's very performance, but it's
Mhm.
not competitive in our world. So, coming from the community itself, what is Lindy Hop? Where does it come from? What's the history behind it?
Yeah. So Lindy Hop, and also I feel like maybe your knowledge of Lindy Hop is probably somewhat similar to my knowledge of Lindy Swing in the ballroom community. So put together our brains here, and we can kind of figure out what it all is. But the Lindy Hop is a dance that I know is what inspired triple swing, single swing, Lindy Swing that's done in dance studios, ballroom dance studios. It started in the late 1920s, like 27, 28. There isn't really a good solid story as far as how it started. I think a lot of it is just passed down orally. Um, One of the more popular legends of how it got its name was that there was a dancer who was interviewed by a newspaper who saw him dance, Shorty George Snowden, um, and they asked him what the dance was, what he was doing. It's just like a lot of quick movement with the feet, a lot of just having the girl fly out several times. And he had seen a recent news article about Charles Lindbergh hopping the Atlantic. And so he just called it the Lindy Hop. And that's the name that stuck. Whether or not this is true, I don't know. But it's a story that a lot of folks have been throwing around for a long time. And so that's kind of what I think has stuck, just because it has a lot of zing to it, as it were. Um, it is a devilishly difficult dance to learn, and a lot of what you would learn in one workshop in one region might actually be very different than what you would learn in a different region. The structure of it is going to be the same. A lot of the use of momentum and energy is going to be the same, but the aesthetic isn't going to be codified like you might see in ballroom dances. So there might be a specific way and this is where I could be wrong, but in ballroom, they might teach a very specific thing that you're supposed to do, or like sets of moves, and then you have to do those specific sets of moves to be able to move on to the next level, something like
Yep.
that.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So there isn't anything like that in Lindy Hop, and I when I teach my classes, the curriculum that I have is something that I've put together. That I've also I didn't make it up per se, but it's just from taking other classes from other instructors. I'm inspired by a lot of other really well-known dancers that I've worked with, like Peter Strom, Naomi Uyama. They're dancers from Minneapolis that teach internationally as well. They have a really great curriculum, and so I'm inspired by a lot of these other instructors for with their curriculum, and then I can kind of change it as needed, just to kind of teach the things that I feel like are important for beginner Lindy Hoppers to have in their belt. But something that I teach here could be completely different from the path that Lindy Hoppers would have, or some of the curriculum that they would have over in Minneapolis. So in that sense, some people might call it like a street dance, a street swing dance, because it's not codified in that manner. I know that it became that there was an offshoot of Lindy Hop that became East Coast Swing or Eastern Swing back in the 1940s, early 1940s,
40s, 50s,
when
somewhere around there.
yeah, when Arthur Murray kind of decided that, hey, this is actually becoming a really big deal. I want to be able to like put these steps to numbers and sell it, and be able to get other instructors to teach this, and have people compete with this kind of dance. And I think that's where Lindy Swing or East Coast Swing, that kind of dance, had evolved. I've also heard that it evolved because it was that Lindy Hop was too devilishly difficult, and it wasn't really something that the masses could learn very quickly, and that actors and actresses couldn't learn it very quickly. So it just wasn't great for film, unless you were actually a Lindy Hopper and you had grown up doing that. So I think there are a lot of reasons why that offshoot for ballroom came about. And I feel like that's kind of the dance that I had started out with, East Coast Swing, or Jitterbug, some people might call it too, in 2003. And that's what I had done for a few years before I even knew what Lindy Hop was. So to kind of give everyone a general idea, it took me about 5 years before I felt more comfortable with the actual basic of Lindy Hop, which is called the swing out. You can learn the swing out in a yeah, I know, right?
That makes me
This is
feel
probably
feel
scaring everyone away.
so much better about my experience, my limited experience with Lindy.
Yeah. So hopefully I won't scare everyone away. And maybe we can talk about that. These days, I think it's a lot easier to learn, because I think YouTube was 2005, and I probably didn't even get into it until probably after that. But it's just kind of like trying to look at what people are doing and then trying to figure it out for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fact that everyone's got slightly different ways that they do the swing out, the Lindy Hop basic, that you kind of have to pick and choose for like your body type, what feels the best with every partner that you're dancing with. So being able to adapt to the different social situations, I think. So it took quite a long time for me to figure out what felt good to me for the swing out. And even my dance partner, Irina Amzashvili, she has a different kind of teaching method or structure that she thinks about with the swing out than I do, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is great, just because again, there's just so many different ways to think of the theory and to teach it.
That's
Um,
awesome.
Hope that answers your question.
No, no, that definitely does. That definitely does. And I'd also say, again, coming from kind of a ballroom mindset, um, do you have a separate umbrella term for kind of the group of dances that come out of that same era? Or is it just broadly Lindy Hop and then also Charleston and Balboa kind of get like put in the same grouping, but there's not
Mhm.
an overarching term for it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So there have been a lot of terms that are kind of thrown around, and I think a lot of those terms are being put under the microscope in this day and age. I think with the Black Lives Matter movement, I mean, we all know that swing dancing and Lindy Hop comes from a African American culture, African American history.
Mhm.
It's a uniquely African American dance, and we want to be able um, to respect that and pay homage to the fact that it comes from a very difficult time, the 1920s, for African Americans. So there are certain terms that are kind of, I think the Lindy Hop community as a whole are trying to stop using or start using. One thing that's kind of in conversations right now is calling it vernacular jazz. I think a lot of folks are trying to move away from the term vernacular jazz. Um, so I think right now folks are just calling it jazz dancing or swing dancing, which I know is a very, very big umbrella term. So Lindy Hop, I think if you were just to say Lindy Hop, that probably will refer to Lindy Hop in Charleston. Lindy Hop is based on Charleston. Charleston is a much older dance that also might even have roots from Africa. Um, and then there's a lot of other kind of predecessors to Lindy Hop that kind of meshed together. So it's just basically a lot of people back in the 1920s seeing bits and pieces of social dancing and putting them all together. So I guess the history of that again becomes very unclear because it's all
Mhm.
very oral. Um, Balboa and other types of swing dances. I mean, we again can just call that as part of under the swing dance umbrella. But you'll see dance events that are just specifically for Balboa. Like, for example, California Balboa Classic is one of the biggest ones. That's in Pasadena or Southern California. Um, and that was a dance that I don't believe actually came from Lindy Hop. It was derived from a different dance, but I think they have uh, kind of intertwined history. Um, I won't go too much into that because I'm not really an expert in Balboa nor its history, but uh, there are events that combine both Lindy Hop and Balboa. And then there's also events, if you just call it like a Lindy Hop event, people will still sometimes do Balboa there, but Charleston will also be included. There's no such thing as like a Charleston event.
Mhm.
I think a lot of folks just kind of incorporate Charleston into their Lindy Hop dancing. So if you were to say Lindy Hop, then I think that already kind of includes Charleston in there. Then there's a
Gotcha.
bunch of other lesser known swing dances, a lot of different types of shag.
I was gonna
So
say
there's,
shag was another one that was coming to my mind as like, I wonder where this fits into the whole puzzle.
yeah. And there's a lot of different types of shag too. So collegiate shag is another dance that kind of doesn't really fit into either of those umbrellas, like Balboa and Lindy Hop, because there's like collegiate shag events, but it's a small enough kind of dance. It's not as well known that sometimes they might combine it with Lindy Hop or Balboa events. Um, that's a dance. If you just look up collegiate shag on YouTube, I feel like that's probably the best way for you to figure out what it is. It's a more high energy dance. That is a little bit more bouncy, a little more upright than Lindy Hop. Balboa, I think, is a lot of folks might describe it as smoother or elegant. Um, and then there's also Carolina Shag, which is much different than collegiate shag. And I think maybe it's a little bit more closely related to West Coast swing,
I'm,
in that a lot of West Coast swing dancers do it.
I may be completely off base in this, and if I am, please by all means correct me.
Mhm.
The only thing that I have ever been told about Carolina Shag is it was created so that you could hold a cocktail in one hand and dance with your partner.
I don't know if I've specifically heard that. Natalia, who's back there, would probably be able to tell you way more about Carolina Shag than me. She does that. I know very little about it, but that sounds like it could be correct. It's very, very little upper body movement and a lot of lower body movement, and essentially, it's a dance to showcase the lead, typically the male, the lead's footwork. Um, so it's just kind of like the lead peacocking. I
Mm.
think that's really one of the main things that you'll see if you were to watch a Carolina Shag dance or routine. So it's a lot of really fast finesse type, smooth leg movement. Um, and I would imagine that you could hold a cocktail in your hand while doing it too. Whether or not it was invented for that purpose, I wouldn't be able to confirm or deny.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And then lastly, West Coast Swing. So West Coast Swing was another offshoot of Lindy Hop. Um, that's a dance that I'm a little bit more familiar with, but I'm less familiar with the history of it. I believe it started more around the 1950s, and I think it used to be called Western Swing. And so that's why a lot of folks, when they sometimes if I say that I swing dance, they'll be like, "Oh, do you do West Coast Swing or East Coast Swing?" And I'm like,
Yep.
and then I'd have to launch into this 30-minute thing that I just talked to you about. No, I'm just kidding. But a West Coast Swing is a dance that, and a lot of West Coast swing dancers are probably going to disagree with me here, but it's not typically danced to swing music.
Right.
Swing music in the sense that it's syncopated. It's got that ba 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 da ba ba da rhythm,
Yeah.
but it's actually danced to a variety of very, very big um, genre of music. You can do blues, country, Justin Timberlake, as
Hmm.
if that's a genre, but just to give you a general idea.
I feel
And
like
it's got a,
Justin Timberlake's his own genre
yeah,
at this point.
pretty much. Um, and then it can have syncopated rhythms, but the basic itself has more of a flat, like step, step, walk, 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 as opposed to a step, step, triple step, syncopated rhythm. So that is also a little bit more uh, upright. It's smoother. It's danced to slower music than Lindy Hop typically. Um, so that's also kind of its own umbrella too. You typically don't see events that do both Lindy Hop and West Coast Swing, but I'd say those are two of the more popular swing dances where you'll
Yep.
see big events.
And if folks that are listening want to learn more about West Coast Swing, you can go back a couple of episodes to when I talked with either Molly King or James Cook. I had them both
Oh,
on
nice.
previously to talk all about the West Coast community. So
Awesome.
got into some competition stuff there with them. Um, which actually, I want to kind of talk about how a Lindy Hop competition actually is structured and works. So, you said that it's not codified, there's not a
Yep.
established curriculum or syllabus. Are
Mhm.
there levels, for instance, in both ballroom and talking with James in the West Coast competitions, there are like novice, beginner, intermediate,
Mhm.
or bronze, silver, gold levels. Is there
Yeah.
similar stratification at competitions, and how is it judged if there's not an established syllabus?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is going to be the most unstructured dance that I think most people are going to hear about. There are levels, but it's in a very loose sense. So in West Coast Swing and Ballroom, I don't know about Ballroom, but you earn points in West Coast Swing. And then you get a certain number of points and then you go to the next level, right? So you have a newcomer, novice, intermediate. There isn't anything like that in Lindy Hop. There was a time, I believe, when they tried to incorporate points, but it never really stuck. So
Hmm.
there are a few folks out there that have Lindy Hop points, but they are completely meaningless. So if you travel to Lindy Hop events, there typically will be different levels depending on how big the event is. And there can be completely different names for those levels. So an advanced competition in one event could be an all-star competition in another event, or could be called open in yet another event. And so this might be super confusing to everyone who's listening, but um, I think when you go to these types of events, you'll just kind of see who's dancing there, the general level. If it's a larger event or an international event, there are events like Camp Hollywood or International Lindy Hop Championships. Um, then you'll generally get a pretty good idea for what um, level you should enter. So there, most of the time, there isn't like a baseline for you to be able to enter a specific competition. They might have guidelines, like just a description of where you think you would put yourself. So, like the International Lindy Hop Championships or ILHC, they might say if you want to compete at the advanced level, then you most likely are teaching at your local dances. You most likely have placed in the top 3 at these certain events, or you're likely traveling and going to a workshop every other week or something like that. So there isn't any one way to really say what level you're at.
Okay.
I think more so it's like if you were to be in a level that you're not supposed to be in, then you just get a lot of flack from the other dancers,
Gotcha.
which happens.
Either you're way outclassed or you're way
Or
above
you're
the level.
sandbagging.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So, is it a situation where you have multiple couples on the floor that are all performing at the same time, and it's just whoever catches a judge's eye is likely to be either called back or placed higher?
Mhm.
Or is it more of a solo performance type situation?
Yeah. There's a few different ways to do it. So I think um, in general, there will be prelims for most of these types of competitions. So the social dancing part of the competitions, those are called like a strictly Lindy. That's where you sign up with a partner and you don't know what the song is going to be. You'll usually get a few songs in a prelim, and that's when a bunch of couples are on the floor. You've got numbers on your back, and you've got a lot of judges that are kind of walking around looking at people who they want to dance in the finals. So depending on how big the event is, you might have 2 judges, you might have 11. Um, and then out of all of the sea of couples that are dancing on the floor, typically you'll have anywhere from 4 to 15 finalists. And then for those finalists, they'll have a what's called spotlights. And so each couple will go out into the middle just one at a time, sometimes 2 at a time, if it's depending on how fast they want the couples to go through. And then they'll dance usually a chorus or half chorus, so like 16/8 or 32/8. And then so they dance on and they kind of dance for 32/8 and then they dance off. And while they're dancing off, the next couple comes on. The cool thing about this that I think is pretty different than really any other dance competition is that 90% of the time this will all be done to live music, to a live band.
Oh, wow.
So you'll have these events, they'll hire a complete big band or like a 5, 6 piece set where they'll be playing this music. So if you've got 10 couples that are dancing in the final, then you'll have like a chorus and then maybe 8 or 9 solos from the band that are going to be kind of essentially mirroring. If they're a really good band, they could mirror some of the movements that you're doing, which is amazing. It's such a great feeling. And then after everyone's done with their spotlight, they might go through twice. Then everyone's going to be dancing at the same time. So everyone, and this is where all of the crazy energy comes and people start screaming, is when everyone at the same time, all the couples start doing the basic, the swing out at, towards the audience. So it's just a bunch of people completely going nuts at the audience as the music roars in the background with the chorus of whatever band is playing there. And it's I think it's actually hilarious that it's the basic, but the basic in Lindy Hop, the swing out is one of the highest energy things that everyone loves. So that's I think one of the highlights of really any dance competition is just that very end when you see a lot of the best dancers at that event doing the swing out all in time to the crescendo the band there.
That has to
Um,
be a crazy experience.
yeah,
That that
yeah.
that I'm thinking of the couple of times that I've had the opportunity to perform to live music, and just having the energy of a live band when you're performing or you're dancing, it just cranks everything up just a little bit more. And if like you said, if everyone's in a line and they're all doing the same pattern, and like you have to do this basic the best that you could possibly do, because the judges are going to see if you're out
Yeah.
just a little bit like that.
Yeah.
That has to be such an adrenaline rush on both the part of the performer and the competitor, and just for the audience seeing that. That has to be
Yeah.
a crazy experience.
Absolutely. And it's not even anything that you have to do. Every once in a while, there's going to be a couple that doesn't do it. It's no one ever tells you to do it, but it's just something that is known in the Lindy Hop community that in the all skate, which is the very end of that finals section of the competition, all the couples just do the swing out for maybe 8/8, because that's what just gets the crowd wild. And the judges at that point usually have already decided who they feel like should be in first through eighth or whatnot. And so the judges are also just going nuts too, as all of this is happening. Yeah, it's just really a good time.
That's awesome.
If there's maybe any tiebreakers, then the judges still might be paying close attention to like the couples that they want to are splitting hairs between. But in most cases, at this point, I think a lot of their decisions have already been made.
That's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah. So that's the main kind of setup, I think, for the competitions. I mentioned Strictly Lindy. The other one where it also happens to be like in a similar structure is called a and this is difficult too because there isn't really a specific name that we have now for it. A lot of events call it a mix and match. It's formerly known as a Jack and Jill. And I know
Okay.
in West Coast Swing, they still call it a Jack and Jill. And essentially, it's where you sign up by yourself and you don't have a partner. Um, and you rotate through a lot of the other people that have signed up as a lead or a follow. And the reason why in Lindy Hop more specifically, we've stopped calling it a Jack and Jill, and I think this is really over the last maybe 3 or 4 years that it's changed, is because it's very um, heteronormative. It means that there's always going to be a guy that's leading and there's always going to be a girl that's following, which is not always the case. I love following. My partner loves leading. We switch a lot, and there's a lot of women who are primarily leaders, and there's a lot of men who are primarily followers, and so it has kind of set them out on the fringes by just calling it a Jack and Jill. So to be a little bit more inclusive, a lot of events have started calling it a mix and match, but you might hear other names like the social competition or luck of the draw. So depending on the event that you're at, there might be a few different names for that too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that move, and I feel like hopefully over the next couple of years, over the next 5-10 years, that all dance styles will start taking a critical look at how we refer to leads and follows, the fact
Hmm.
that we refer to them as leads and follows now more frequently than ladies and gentlemen, or as you say,
Right.
Jack and Jill.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier when we were talking kind of the history of the dance, taking a look at where our dances come from, and are we really honoring the culture and the history that created these wonderful styles that we're now, adapting and changing and doing
Yeah.
whatever it is that we're doing to them. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I I really do like how the Lindy Hop community has been very progressive in that sense, and I think because of those kinds of changes, I know the West Coast swing community is also slowly getting there. They have, I think, a committee that really oversees a lot of the official competitions and the naming and the judging criteria and everything like that. So that's a lot more codified than what's happening in the Lindy Hop community. So I think change is harder in that sense for West Coast Swing. But I know recently, for example, they've started allowing same-sex couples to compete and win. Um, and that's, I think, really in the last 2 years or so. And that was a huge win, I feel like, in that community too. So it's happening,
Mhm.
just very slowly.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys are ahead of us. Ballroom just end of 2019 said, oh, yeah, maybe we should allow non gendered partnerships. Maybe that's a thing that we should start doing.
Yeah.
But we're all
Great.
getting there.
Yeah.
So, kind of thinking about that, like, what the future of the different dance styles.
Mhm.
I want to first start with just getting your opinion. Should there be an established curriculum or syllabus for Lindy? Do you think that's something that the sport would benefit from, or is there something unique about the fact that it's not written down on paper yet?
Yeah. I personally really love the fact that there isn't anything that's codified in Lindy Hop. Um, Very much like with the English language, there's a lot of different ways that you can, a lot of different dialects, as it were, but you can still understand, someone from Texas as you can someone from New Jersey. It's just different in the way that they talk, and I think that really adds a lot of flavor to the dance. So I can still swing out with someone from Montreal as I can from someone in LA and someone in New York. So, or even in South Korea, where Lindy Hop is huge. There's thousands and thousands of swing dancers. There's like 15, maybe 20 dance studios, and there's dancing every single night specifically for Lindy Hop. Um, and there isn't a specific way that you have to learn it. And whenever I teach the dance, I typically will say that, or start off in my classes, that the way that I'm teaching is the way that I found to be most comfortable for me and most helpful for me. I've learned a lot of different ways of doing it. So when you learn something from me, I want you to take the things that feel the most comfortable for you. And then if you learn something else from another instructor, you can incorporate that into your dance as well. And so I think because there's a lot of different shapes and sizes of dancers, there should be a lot of different shapes and sizes of the dance itself. Really, whatever it is that you feel comfortable doing.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah.
I
So.
really I really appreciate that. I think that's fantastic. And that's something that for me personally, I like the structure of ballroom dance. I like the fact that there's very clear set of rules and a clear set of syllabus steps for bronze and silver and gold.
Mhm.
Um, but I think the heart of what you're saying and the essence of what you're saying is something that I wish students of ballroom dance would learn earlier, which is learn from a bunch of different people and then figure
Mhm.
out what feels good for you and what works for your body. I feel
Mhm.
like in my industry in the ballroom dance field, it's not until you have several years of instruction under your belt or lessons under your belt that you go, oh, this doesn't really work for me. I need to find my own path, or I need to feel like I can make bold choices that work and speak to
Yeah.
my experience.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I think that's really helpful. I think because sometimes I'll even get students that they'll take a class from me and they'll be like, "This is not how I learned it at all. Like I learned I was supposed to do this," and I'm like, "Oh, cool. Like that's totally fine if you want to do it that way. These are the reasons why I don't do it that way." And some cases, if they were taught or if they kind of were under the impression that there's one specific way to do it, I think it's a lot harder for them to be able to branch out and figure out that there are other ways that could potentially be more comfortable for them. So I feel like a lot of social dances can benefit from that, especially social dances, really, because you're going to be dancing with a lot of other people that all have different nuanced ways for their dance. And so you want to be able to adjust your technique to the person that you're dancing with, right? Because if you're just dancing like Samantha every single time, no matter who you're dancing with, I think that you're not going to be as an enjoyable partner as if you're able to really adapt to whomever it is that you're dancing with every 3 minutes. So I think having that background to be able to adjust and adapt to the dancing to your partner makes you a better dancer too.
Definitely. Dance is at its heart, whether it's social, competitive performance, it's a conversation between two people, right?
Absolutely.
And if you go into every single conversation with the same tone of voice, the same agenda, the same talking points, then you're not actually listening to the person that you're
Right.
conversing with.
Yeah. And that's also what I love about the Lindy Hop community and the fact that it's such a widely traveled dance is that when you go to a different country to go dance, you don't even have to speak their same language. And you might feel that the connection could be a little bit different. But in some cases, it is still very much similar enough that it feels like home, no matter where you're dancing.
That's awesome. That's what you hope for, right? From a dance
Yeah,
community is that you can go anywhere and that it still feels just like your own backyard.
yeah.
Speaking of your own backyard, let's talk about Salt City Swing. So
Yeah.
it's an organization, not a
Uh-huh.
business. It's an organization
Yeah.
based in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Hmm.
Um, you offer classes. You've got a well, hopefully at some point in the
Hopefully soon
future
again. Yeah.
you'll have classes and events. But what is it? Where did it come out? Where did it come from? And why the
Mhm.
choice to make it an organization rather than a for-profit business?
Yeah, so I started Salt City Swing, and we had a different name back in 2017, but this is something that has always been a passion of mine, and I really wanted to be something that's community led. So we have a whole board, and we're able to kind of talk about what we feel like is best for the community. We are able to organize workshops that way. So it is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we do teach classes out of Ballroom, Utah. Just kidding. We did teach classes, and hopefully will again soon. Um, and the mission of Salt City Swing is to be able to preserve and also educate uh, people in Salt Lake City, but also in Utah in general, about the history of swing dancing, of Lindy Hop, and the other dances that fall under the swing umbrella. Um, so to be able to help keep that going in Salt Lake City. So it's just kind of a passion project of mine that I am really excited that there's a lot of other people who also love the dance as well. So it's definitely a group thing that is slowly growing. We've every week we have several different levels. So we've got like our level 1, level 2, level 3. So people just straight off the street who've never had any dance experience can learn. Um, you don't need any dance partners. We rotate very much in like mix and match competitions. So you get to be able to practice with lots of folks that you've never met before. And we have also dancers that are taking classes that have been dancing for years. So it's a really great community. Um, and we have used to have weekly dances, and also uh, we work with the Excellence in the Community, which is at the Gallivan Center, and they have live music there typically in the summers, and a lot of folks go there to go swing dancing as well. And so sometimes I'll be teaching a lot of the swing dances out there every once in a while too. So it's a really fun, thriving community that I'm excited to be a part of here in Salt Lake.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's so weird. So since we moved to Salt Lake, I with Ballroom Utah have assisted in teaching at the Excellence in the Community events every
Yeah,
single summer, and not being there this summer, it's felt
so
so
weird.
strange.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. I feel like summer hasn't started yet, and it's already July.
It's already July and it's 98 degrees outside today, but it doesn't feel like summer yet. Yeah. Um, so um, with that, the they because the majority of the classes that you were teaching hopefully will in the future teach are group classes, because you made the point of saying you don't need a partner, we rotate partners. Have you started having those conversations about if and when it's safe and prudent to start teaching again, how you're going to change things? Or are you putting off specifically coming back because you want to kind of keep the same essence that you had before all of this hit?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it is definitely prudent to change things with the times. Um, it is definitely not a good idea to have folks come in and touch hands and breathe on each other, breathe on other folks that you don't know. So when we do come back, and social dancing is likely to be the last thing of everything to come back, just because of the fact that you are going to be dancing with strangers. But when we do come back, there are going to be a lot of safety measures in place to really help reduce the chances of spreading COVID. Um, there have been a lot of conversations. I don't know what we'll do specifically. I don't know if we have a really good answer right now. I think we're just constantly learning about what we can do that's going to be helpful. Masks will definitely be helpful, it sounds like, and then also it may be helpful to come with a partner or your social bubble, as it were, so that way we minimize intermingling of different groups, which essentially could turn into a super spreader event. Um, so kind of figuring out if there are people that can show up with a partner or a small group that will just stick together and not rotate will likely be something that we'll have to do. There's also solo jazz dancing too, so that's another option um, where you don't dance with a partner. You can dance to by yourself to the exact same type of music that you would typically dance Lindy Hop to. It's called solo jazz or solo Charleston, and it's, I think, actually a pretty good thing to have under your belt when, even if you're more of a partner dancing person, if you don't ever really expect to be doing solo dancing. And I think it's just because it helps you with body awareness, it helps you with rhythm and moving your body in a way that is consistent with the aesthetic of Lindy Hop. So that also is something that we'll likely have a focus on too. These days, there have been a ton of online solo jazz classes coming from the Lindy Hop community as a way for folks to stay in touch with the dance, but then also for instructors to be able to help support themselves and to make money when they can't teach in person. So that's also another option that we're looking at too.
Yeah, I feel like, again, coming from the ballroom mindset, that's a conversation that I've been having with a lot of fellow instructors, which is okay, so we've been teaching online classes for the last 4 months now. That have all been in the solo space. So how do you as an individual work on your specific technique and your body awareness, and what drills can we make you do for 45 minutes that you would absolutely refuse to if you were in the studio because you want to be dancing with another human being? So the
Yeah.
fact that there already existed a solo dance style for the Lindy community, I think, is just a step ahead of where we are right now.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I can feel for that. It's not something that everyone does, and it is, for in some cases, kind of like pulling teeth, trying to convince Lindy Hoppers who are only social dancing or like partner dancing that solo dancing is important. So
Yeah,
maybe we're just like a small step ahead, but it is an actual, like, there are solo jazz competitions, so it is a very real and big thing. Um, there's solo jazz events even too. It's not as common, but it's there are a few out there.
very cool. I will have to check that out after
Yeah.
this. Um, the last thing that I wanted to kind of circle back to, and then just in general, if you had anything else that you wanted to talk about today for the episode, I wanted to talk about a music video that you were in.
Oh.
As all of this craziness started, Lizzie and the Triggermen put out a music video, the dance song parentheses the
Mhm.
end of the world as we know it, on April 1st, and you and your lovely partner appeared for like 2 frames. um,
Pretty much.
so how did that happen? How did you get involved in the project, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, so Lizzie and the Triggermen, they're a fantastic band. They had reached out to Nikki Marvin, who's one of the co-owners of Atomic Ballroom over in SoCal, in Orange County, and Irina Amzashvili, again, my partner. She used to work over there, so she moved here to Salt Lake City from Orange County. And Nikki Marvin had reached out to us just to see if we wanted to be a part of this music video. Nikki was working with Lizzie and her band on putting this together, and so we were like, sure. And so they basically just asked a bunch of dancers to. They gave us the song beforehand and asked us to dance to the song in a well lit room, or like in the living room. So it's just a bunch of people dancing in their living rooms to this song. And so we just took the video, sent it back to them, and they just put together. I forgot exactly what the statistics were, but maybe like 15 countries, dozens of dancers and dance couples that were featured in this music video. So it was kind of fun to be able to just be a part of that.
That's awesome. Did they tell you what section of the song to choreograph to, or did you put together choreography for the whole piece and then they just decided which clip they wanted to take for it?
Yeah, so we just all danced the whole thing, and none of it's choreographed. There might have been some folks that choreographed their sections, but we just social danced it and probably did it a few times just so that way we could figure out what the music sounded like. But there weren't any real choreographed movements, which, kind of a side note, a lot of times when there are folks that see Lindy Hop, they ask, how did the partners know what the movements are going to be? And maybe this happens in ballroom too, but it's just a lot of connection, a lot of solid connection um, to your partner and to the music. So a lot of times when you see something and you think it's choreographed, it really isn't. It's also
That
kind of the fun thing.
Yeah, that makes it so much more impressive. Along those lines, so ballroom very much lead and follow, kind of whoever's leading is going to create an opportunity for something to happen, and then the follow, we react to it.
Right.
West Coast swing, when I was talking with James and Molly, much more the yes and approach, kind of taken
Hmm.
to the extreme where the lead sets something up on 1, 2, and then the follow can create whatever they want essentially within those bounds on 3 through 6. Where does Lindy fall in kind of that spectrum?
Yeah, it's definitely not as much of the yes and that West Coast swing has, because a lot of the time, well, West Coast swing you can dance to maybe 70 to 120 BPM or so. I'd say is a pretty solid range. 120 is kind of on the fast end for West Coast swing. 120 is on the slower end for Lindy Hop. I'd say that's a very slow, comfortable rhythm for Lindy Hop. And the syncopated triple step is actually what makes it easier to dance faster. So medium tempo for Lindy Hop would be something like 180 BPM, and fast would be 220, 240, 260. So that's something like da, 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 boom, boom, ba, ba, da, boom, boom, ba, ba, da,
Yeah,
swinging out like that.
it's a
Um,
jive or quick step tempo, I think.
yeah,
Maybe even
yeah,
a
yeah,
little bit
yeah.
faster than that.
Yeah. Now we don't really dance that fast all the time. So again, I don't want to scare everyone away by saying that we're always dancing at 240 BPM. I'd say that's more like a competition uh, type of tempo, or if you wanted to have the whole floor just get into one jam circle, because no one wants to dance 240 beats per minute for 4 minutes. Um, but because the dance can be done a lot faster, there is a lot of the dance. It is completely lead follow, but the follow is depending on a lot of the energy that you're providing in the dance. There's a lot of stretch, there's a lot of momentum, a lot of kind of making sure that the amount of rotation that you're leading is clear to the follow. Um, and there is maybe some interpretation. I'd say there is definitely interpretation on the follows end. So there is definitely a conversation. Um, and there also is the idea that the lead will kind of open up a space, will kind of create an energy, and the follow can interpret that energy in a few different ways, and then the lead has to then react to that, right? So very similar to ballroom in that sense, but I think it is maybe a little bit more imperative that the follow still maintain that trajectory that the lead had created. So if I create a big linear stretch, then the follow 99% of the time really should go through and complete the energy of that stretch. Because if the follow doesn't, then if you're going at 200 beats per minute, then that could potentially be catastrophic.
It feels like you're
um,
running into a brick wall, just coming to a complete stop.
yeah. So it's a lot of energy redirection, and it's very important to be able to utilize the connection with your partner and the counterbalance or stretch with your partner to move into the next thing.
Awesome. Um, Couple of thoughts that I had in there. One, a lot of times watching videos on YouTube, which we know is dangerous. Um, I see, the lifts and the tricks and the dips
Yes.
and someone swinging around somebody else. Again, obviously you would prep with your partner. Okay, these are
Hmm.
the tricks and these are the lifts that we are capable of doing in our arsenal. Is there something where you're looking for a specific musical cue in order to do a particular pattern, or is that one of those audibles where you're like, okay, after this we're gonna do the thing?
Yeah. Okay. So you want to like get into how sausage is made
Yeah.
um, in Lindy Hop. So there are a few different ways that people can kind of cue aerials or air steps. Um, Typically in a competition. So when you're watching a YouTube video and people are doing their spotlights, uh, I'd say the two most common are that there are going to be choreographed sections. So 16/8 of choreography. The thing with jazz music is that it's very structured. So even if you've never heard a song before, most of the time there's going to be um, the beginning of the phrase and some sort of ending of that phrase, either in 4/8 or 8/8. If it's a blues structure, it might be 6/8. And so you'll know that there's going to be some sort of conclusion to that musical sentence after 8/8. So then you'll say, okay, well, we're going to choreograph this little section and we're going to put an aerial at the 8th 8. And that aerial is going to take 8 counts. So that's, and then after the aerial, you'll move on to the next section. So if you're dancing 16/8, maybe you'll do an aerial on the 8th 8, and then you'll continue dancing and then do another aerial on the 16th 8. That's one way to do it. And I think that's a little bit more common when you have that kind of spotlight thing and you know what the musical structure is going to be like, so you can choreograph that beforehand. Not everyone does that. A lot of folks will be able to kind of have a movement before the aerial that feels maybe slightly different than the aerial itself. They may potentially tell their partner or kind of give them a look to say that there is going to be this specific aerial coming up. Um, and I think also there is going to be some sort of connection with the music, because most folks are not going to just do an aerial kind of in the middle of a phrase where it doesn't really fit, doesn't have that huge bang that's going to match the aerial. Um, so that's another way that some folks will kind of know that an aerial is coming up. It's not a social thing. You won't see aerials on the social dance floor, and it's actually looked down upon because that's how people get hurt. Um,
Let's
and
let's go ahead and highlight that, put it in bold, put flashing neon lights around that. Do
please,
not
yeah,
do aerials on a social dance floor.
yeah, and that's how it was described back in the 1920s and 30s too. Like aerials, Frankie Manning is kind of we call him like the ambassador of Lindy Hop. He was the inventor of the air step. And when it became more popular, even back then, that was something that was really just for performances or jam circles, that sort of thing too. So it wasn't ever really done as a social dance move.
Good to know. No, because I have definitely unfortunately been part of this. And I know that it is prevalent within the ballroom community that if you are on a mixed social floor and there are Lindy dancers, most ballroom people kind of go, ugh, because at least once in our history we've been kicked in the face or
Oh no.
caught an elbow or something from presumably novice beginner dancers that did not
Uh-huh.
know better, that were like, yes, this is a swing song, let me see if I can toss my girl over her head. It's like, no, not here, not now.
I apologize on behalf of the Lindy community for that ever happening to anyone. Uh, that's something that I feel like a lot of folks come into swing dancing like that's their gateway drug. They're like, oh, I want to be able to throw my partner in the air, so I'm going to learn swing dancing. But really, that's like less than 1% of what swing dancing is. And and you really don't do it ever unless you're in a performance team or if you've got a regular partner and you're doing a jam circle somewhere. So it's not a real thing in social dancing.
It's a good thing to know, and it's a good thing for our listeners to be reassured
Perfect.
that it is not reflective of the larger community if you've had that experience. So that's good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Anything else that you wanted to kind of talk about? Any other of those like pieces of information or tidbits that folks should know if they're interested in getting into the Lindy community?
Yeah, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but a lot of folks think that you have to be a teenager with perfect joints in order to dance Lindy Hop. But really you don't. So I know I mentioned that some of the dancing can go up to 240, 260 beats per minute, but when you're at a social dance, most DJs, depending on the region where you're in, but a lot of times they'll hover around like 120, 140, 160, um, which is a very, very comfortable tempo when you're dancing Lindy Hop. And so you really don't need perfect joints. It's not a lot of bouncing and not a lot of jumping, contrary to the half of the name of Lindy Hop. You're not hopping the entire time. It can be very smooth, and it can be very low energy in the sense that you're not going to be winded after every single dance. So when you go to some dance events, you might start dancing at 9 and you might not get off the dance floor until 5 or 6 in the morning, and you're not going to do that by jogging the entire time, by sprinting the entire time. So there's folks of all ages. Frankie Manning, the person that I'd mentioned before, he had danced all the way up until he passed away at the age of 94. If you were to look him up, which I completely recommend, if you just look up Frankie, Frankie. In fact, I have a book right here. This is a fantastic book to learn more about the history of swing dancing. Frankie Manning is probably the reason why a lot of us are doing Lindy Hop these days, and maybe even why there is Lindy or triple swing in ballroom too, is because he and many other dancers back in the day had made it a lot more popular enough for dance studios to really notice Lindy Hop. But if he can dance it at the age of 94, then I feel like that's pretty good evidence that really anyone at any age can do Lindy Hop. So it's not necessarily an athletic dance. You can make it an athletic dance if you want it to be, but I actually very much prefer dancing very lazily and conserving my energy. I think that's one of my tenets when I'm teaching it, is that you want to be able to be as efficient as possible to be able to dance as fast as you need.
Well, you've certainly converted me. I will be honest. I have always kind of looked at Lindy and gone, yeah, that's fun, but I'm 5'10" and I'm long and gangly, and I just look awkward if I'm moving quickly because I think I've always seen it again through that ballroom lens. So when all of this calms down, when we can go back in the studio and be around each other without worrying about the plague, I will sign up for some lessons with you so I can experience Lindy Hop in a calmer, easier fashion.
That'd be fantastic. I have some folks that you can look to, really tall follows that are very elegant, that look fantastic with their dancing, and they may be tall and gangly, but I think it really is for any height, any length of arm, to be able to dance the Lindy Hop.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you, Anthony, so much for being a guest today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Samantha.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Ballroom Chat. If you'd like to support Anthony and all that he's doing with his nonprofit, you can find out more information at saltcityswing.org, or you can follow them on Instagram at salt.city.swing or on Facebook at /SLC I've been your host, Samantha with Love.Live.Dance. You can find this and all of our podcast episodes at lovelivedance.com/podcast or at Ballroom Chat across all social media platforms. You may have seen that we recently launched a Patreon page at patreon.com/ballroomchat. If you become a patron, we do appreciate it, and you'll unlock bonus content as well as some behind the scenes episodes to further your dance information as well. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, stay positive, and as always, I hope to see you dancing. Bye, guys.